It's small. Yeah, I can. Whoa. Little physical comedy never hurt.
All right, just waiting on the live stream. And we are good. Okay, welcome everyone to the New York launch of Crime Inc. Iconic. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my beloved partner Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the room you are in right now. So the Bureau is an independent, all-volunteer queer bookstore that Donnie and I founded back in 2012, and that's been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. So we have regular hours, Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m., and then we often stay open later when we have events such as this. So as an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore, we very much depend on both sales and donations to keep this machine going. So I'm gonna pass a bag. If you're able to give a donation, we appreciate it. And now that we are paying rent here at the center, we are asking people, if you are able to become a monthly sustainer. So I'm gonna pass a bag around. You can scan the QR at the top if you're interested in that. You can also go to our website, bgsqd.com, click on the menu on donate, and you'll see that info. You can make a monthly donation of any amount. It's tax deductible, and it will help us pay rent and continue to do what we do here. You can also make a donation by Venmo if you like, if you're watching online, at bgsqd. I'll pass this around. And if you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, or again on the website, bgsqd.com. And you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. So before I introduce our panelists, there was a little change of show here. Two of our panelists were not able to make it tonight, so Lev Rosen kindly stepped in.
Thank you, Lev.
Yes, we're used to making things happen on the fly, right. Especially these days. I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau recognizes that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-natives who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. So yes, we're asking you for a monthly donation. We make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community House. We pass the money around, but we like encouraging people to do that because it's a concrete way to follow up on a land acknowledgement and not just say words. You can find out more at mannahattafund.org. And the Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a fundamental part of our collective queer liberation. And we encourage you to take one of our free zines at the front to read about why we feel it's important, especially for queer people, to speak on behalf of Palestinians and in solidarity with Palestinians. And I will say, because I've sometimes gotten feedback, that if this statement makes you uncomfortable, I ask you to sit with that discomfort for a moment and read the zine, and then I would be happy to talk with you. So let's get to it. Let me introduce our panelists. John Copenhaver is an award-winning author whose latest novel, Hall of Mirrors, was named a New York Times Crime Novel of the Year. His debut, Dodging and Burning, won the Macavity Award.
That's right, yeah.
Macavity Award.
The cat.
And The Savage Kind earned the Lambda Literary Award. A founding member of Queer Crime Writers, he teaches at Virginia Commonwealth University, mentors in the University of Nebraska MFA program, and lives in Richmond, Virginia with his husband, artist Jeffrey Paul Herity. Robin Geigel is the author of 4 novels featuring Erin McCabe, a transgender criminal defense attorney. Time magazine selected her novel, Survivor's Guilt, as one of the 100 best mystery thriller books of all time. It was also named as one of the best crime novels of 2022 by the New York Times, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and won the Publishing Triangle's Joseph Hansen Award for LGBTQ+ crime writing. Her 4th novel, Nothing But the Truth, was selected by the New York Times as one of the best crime novels of 2024. And Lev Rosen will introduce himself.
I'm just filling in.
Please give them all a very warm welcome. Who's taking the mic?
I'll start. All right, yeah, so I am just filling in and working off some other notes from other people. But I was coming here anyway just to watch, so I'm very excited to hear all about this anthology. John, I know you are a contributor as well as the editor, so why don't you tell us a little about what brought the anthology together and what the concept is?
Yeah, so in 2023, as Greg mentioned, I co-founded an organization called Queer Crime Writers, and Jeff Marks, one of our organizers, did a study in 2023 of all the short stories being published in established crime anthologies, and found that out of 517 stories, less than 1% had queer representation. And as an organization, we just sort of threw that information out into the world. And Salem West, who's my co-editor for this anthology, reached out to me and she said, John, why don't we do something about this representation? And Bywater will, publish an anthology of queer crime fiction. And I said, oh, wow, yes, let's do it. Well, actually, I was like, maybe, I don't know, yes, I can do this, okay. I think that it became a sort of a passion to not just answer that call, but to actually demonstrate to the world all the amazing voices writing in the suspense and thriller genre that are queer and have lots of interesting and various stories to tell. One of the things that really came out of doing this was just how rich the diversity of the types of stories, the subject matter, everything from noir to police procedurals to cozy adjacent. I don't think there's a real cozy mystery in here, but close to cozy mystery. And I think legal thriller, all kinds of things. So I think that was very exciting to sort of discover along the way. But it really came out of this initial impulse to answer a call. Yeah.
I remember when you were asking me to blurb it and we were talking, you said it was almost like a sample pack, right, of queer crime authors. So I guess my question, well, let's go to your questions, John or me. And we'll go to Robin now. I want to know a little about your story and specifically which queer icon you used and why.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming.
Yes.
And John, thank you for putting this all together with Salem, and Lev for pitch hitting.
Thank you so much.
My queer icon was Christine Jorgensen. So I picked Christine for a number of reasons. Number one, I'm a transgender woman. Christine is like one of the foundational people in the trans community. Christine came out, or I should say, her coming out, she was forced out by the New York Daily News, in a front page headline that says, with a before and after picture, that says, XGI becomes blonde beauty. And I remember that picture. I mean, I was born in 1952, so I didn't see it on December 1st, 1952, and remember it. But I remember it growing up, having seen it, and so for somebody like me who was trans, growing up in a time when there was no representation, I mean, Christine was the icon because we didn't know anyone else. And so I wanted to write a story, and you know, the premise wasn't to feature the icon in the story. So the story, my story is called Invisible. It's not about Christine Jorgensen, but she appears in it, number one, through that New York Daily News front page, and then as a symbol of where we are now and where we were on December 1st, 1952, when Christine was celebrated. She was somebody that was in the press, that had notoriety in a good way, and was honored and appeared on stage and was recognized as the woman she was. And here we are now, 73 years later. And I know the number because it's my age. 73 years later, where we're vilified and we're hiding and people are attacking us. And so I wanted to show that juxtaposition of where we were and somehow where we've come to, and how people in the trans community, for various reasons, are trying to remain invisible because being visible can get you killed.
Same question for you, John.
Sure. So, I mean, one thing I should say, and I think you kind of pointed out, is that the sort of thematic, it's called Crime Inc. Iconic, and every story is inspired by a queer icon of some sort. And the icons don't necessarily have to be queer themselves, they just have to be iconic to queer people, like Dolly Parton, for example. For my story, I used Truman Capote, because Truman Capote is one of my favorite writers. I taught, in Cold Blood for many years, high school students. I knew the day when I was teaching in Cold Blood to high school students, and they said I didn't get to sleep last night because I couldn't put it down, that something was right about teaching this book. Sorry, I didn't mean to terrify them, but I'm really glad that I kept them up reading. My story, though, actually has a lot to do with something that has been in my mind a lot recently, which is the way, for lack of a better way of putting it, sort of male toxicity, particularly how men create environments in which violence emerges, and that the actor of the violence isn't always the person you expect them to be. So let me give it a little better context. In Cold Blood, everyone knows sort of who the killers were up front, Dick Hickok and Perry Smith. But people don't realize sort of who actually pulled the trigger on a lot of these murders. And it's surprising to find out the more sensitive of the killers did. The one that we're most compelled by, the most, for lack of a better way, humanized figure is also the one that does the brutality. And I kept on thinking about that. And I wanted to create a story where that essentially happened, but on a smaller scale, because it's a short story. So the story is about these frat brothers who, as an initiation for the fraternity, tell the pledges that they have to go kill a goose with a golf club. It's in the first line, so I'm not giving anything away. You've got to go out to this pond and bludgeon a goose to death if you want to be part of this group. And so they're like essentially saying you have to do this act of violence to belong. And it's fucked up. And I think it really does happen a lot. I've been in these spaces where this sort of thing has gone on. Not exactly that. At my school where I went to college, this happened after this event, very like this happened. And I just want to know, I want to understand like that situation, like why do men do this to each other? And there's definitely a queer thread to it as well, but there's a lot about gender too. You got your own.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're both sort of using these icons of queerness to sort of explore what you think of as contemporary ideas, I guess we should say. Do you think, and Robin, have you read many other stories in the anthology?
Yeah, I've probably read about half of them so far.
Okay, great. Oh, I just remembered what my other question is going to be. I'm going to come up with a few questions. So my question, I think, is like, did you ever did you ever think when conceiving of this anthology, of it being something that was a way of sort of transposing queer history, of sort of being like, oh, let's look at queer history, let's look at it today?
I think it's a really fascinating thing. So the short answer is no, we didn't sort of set out to do that. But that's what happened anyway. A lot of the stories in the collection are historical. And I think that was very, no one said, write historical, stories, but I think it kind of emerged when people wanted to talk about icons. And you kind of have this sort of trajectory going through it, and a loose trajectory of an exploration of queer history. And even from like sort of very specific, queer history having to do with sort of queer crime fiction, Jane Lawless, very famous queer detective character, comes up as, again, this piece. And so I think that, but then larger concerns as well. And I think that happened organically, which was really cool. I couldn't have predicted that necessarily. I mean, it makes sense when you think about icons, but I didn't necessarily, when we were like throwing around ideas, thematic ideas to unify the anthology, we didn't really know, like, okay, this is going to be the result.
Yeah. One thing I could say as an author is I had no idea what anybody else was writing about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing what John says, that it all kind of came together, because I don't know anybody who collaborated in any way with any of the other writers. So when I started reading them, I was like, wow, there's a theme here. And as John said, it wasn't planned. When John and Salem sent out the thing, it was just like, write a short story, X number of words about a queer icon in the mystery crime genre. Those were our instructions.
Yeah.
And yet somehow, thematically, it all came together without anybody touching base with anyone else. And it's fascinating now for me to read them, because I'm like reading some of these stories and going, these are amazing. And they're telling a story that has a theme that threads through the whole thing. And it, as John said, it wasn't planned that way, but it just worked out that way.
That's so amazing. Have you spoken to other writers in the anthology and been like, have you seen this? Have you still seen our theme? Were you thinking the same thing I was?
The answer is no, I haven't. But it would be interesting to see if people feel the same way that I do, because again, as I'm reading them, I'm like just drawn to what everyone was saying and how different the stories are. Like John's about, fraternity brothers. Mine is about a police procedural, and yet there's a theme that runs through all of them.
Amazing. That's so cool. You got to get everyone together
Right.
and ask them all, once they've read everyone else's, get a big group, just be a little add-on zine or something, and be like, all right guys, whose story is like the most similar to yours? All right, what do you think crime fiction allows us to explore about queerness that other genres don't, or don't as easily?
It's a question I ask first, and it's interesting because I've heard a lot of different answers, so I'm maybe represent some of those answers. My own take is that it allows us to explore morality and question sort of conventional morality, because we've always been sort of subjected to and hemmed in by sort of conventional morality. So when you think about the history of crime fiction and what those novels, were trying to do, they often were adhering to conventional morality. I teach a class called Intro to Crime Fiction at VCU, and we were just finished Agatha Christie's and Murder is Announced, and now we're in the Big Sleep category, but they're very in this sort of conventional space. And even my students are sort of aware of this in interesting ways, because they're not, things have changed. And so, we have this interesting sort of position as queer people to think about these more complexly. We don't always go back to the usual. We think about not necessarily returning a world to order by the end of a crime novel, but maybe a new order. We're moving society and culture in a different direction, a more accepting, more inclusive direction, hopefully. Or if it's dark, we're commenting on the fact that it isn't. Other people sort of said this sort of issues of justice, you know, that we understand justice maybe a little more keenly than, you know, mainstream like crime writers do, because we've often been the subject of injustice. I think that's probably true for a lot of marginalized crime writers as well. And so I think it's interesting though. I mean, what do you think, Robin?
No, I kind of dig into the last comment about how, you know, as outsiders, we're drawn to and want to write about a system, number one, that's unjust. But number two, at least in my case, sometimes I want to make it just. I want to fix it. And crime fiction is a way to do that because we're the authors. We can make it turn out. And it doesn't always turn out right. It doesn't always turn out that justice is served. I mean, in a number of my books, justice isn't served. But you have that narrative that, as an outsider, look at what we're faced with. And a crime novel is just such a good way to show the injustice against marginalized communities.
And I know in your case, you're a lawyer.
Right, so you really have that.
So I'm curious if you get to, based on that, do you get to fix any injustices you've personally seen while working in the legal system? You don't have to, you know, break confidentiality or
Well,
anything.
so this would have nothing to do with the anthology, because my story in the anthology is not a legal thriller, it's a police procedural. And it's really about solving the murder of someone, you know, in the start of the book, who happens to be a cop and is murdered, and then the police trying to solve it. And the transgender issue is part of that story on a number of different levels. In terms of my books, no, they're fiction. I don't write about anybody, despite what people may say, and they're all set in New Jersey, and people are always trying to peg my corrupt politicians as so-and-so, and I said, no, I'm from New Jersey, there's enough corrupt politicians that, you know, they're nobody in particular. I can make them up with the best of them.
Fantastic. Short stories demand compression and precision. What was especially rewarding or tricky about crafting your piece for this anthology? I am terrible at short stories, as I have said many, many times, so please educate me.
All right, well, I'm gonna go first on this one, because John was my editor. And I had never written a short story before. And so I was really the literal fish out of water. I read a lot of short stories, but I've never written one. And so for me, it was, you know, trying to get that brain that wanted to write, you know, 60,000 words about this story down to 3,000. And so I thought I had a good start, but John was amazing in helping me to get the theme to come together within, you know, the number of words. And I probably went over by a lot, and he gave me grace. But I mean, I just want to give him not only a pat on the back as an author, but as an editor, because again, he did my story, and he was a tremendous help in finding the theme that I wanted to come out of that story and bringing it out in a much sharper way than my original draft. So, thank you.
Well, I mean, I think it was a joy to edit Robin's story and many of the other stories in the collection, because there's such good material to work with. And this is the exciting thing about an editor. Like, you know, as a writer, you're kind of pulling up and getting all the stuff on the page. As an editor, you get to look at it from a distance and sort of help the writer, you know, sort of ultimately conceive of it in its, I guess, essentially best form, at least that the two of you come to sort of an understanding of. And so I thought that was a real joy of this. I think it's really, I agree, I think writing short fiction is really difficult. I find it difficult too. And many of the authors in the collection, it was either their first short story or they're like, okay, I'll say yes to this, but you gotta help me. And actually that was really fun, because I could stand outside of it. I knew it was hard, and I could stand outside of it and I could help. You know, I think that the short fiction as a form, it's just, you know, you have a novelistic imagination, and I do, and we all do. you can go sort of in expansive directions. But short fiction has to be very kind of like tight and focused. And you can't, ultimately you're not telling up the full story. You're giving us a little bit of probably what's a larger story that's sort of with a satisfying arc. And the more that it has like Aristotelian proportions, meaning like the time is pretty tight. It's not, you're not dealing with lots of characters and many scenes and that kind of thing. The more that it kind of works as a piece of short fiction. But not all stories are told that way and don't have to be told that way. But I think that that was one of the challenges, because mystery writers, they like complex plots, lots of twists. I think a lot of people have read this collection and they're like, well, there are some mystery stories in here, but a lot of them aren't mystery stories. I'm like, that's why it's called crime fiction. They all involve a crime, but they're not all mystery stories, because mystery in a short form is very difficult to pull off. My friend Art Taylor does it amazingly. I don't know how he does it.
So again, asking very selfishly for personal reasons, how do we do it? How did you help Robin? Or Robin, what was the best piece of advice you gave
what was that? It's hard for me to remember all the feedback I gave.
So again, it's a police procedural. John helped streamline it because, as he said, I'm a novelist. I want to have complex, setups and everything else. And so he was like, yeah, I think you can streamline it here. I think you can do this. And then, he made the ending a lot more powerful than it was. I mean, I wanted a powerful ending. It was originally a lot darker, I think, even before I sent it to you. But I didn't want to go totally dark. I wanted to end on a hopeful note, even though it's like kind of a cringe hopeful note. And he helped bring that out, because there was just too much there originally. And he was like, you can tighten this up, you can do this, you can do this. And there were a couple of references to movies that I had in there that you were like, I really like the references to the movies, but they gotta go. And so, again, he just made it really tighter, because, I wanted, the full sweep, but I didn't have it. And again, just really helped me to focus on what was the essential part of the story and make sure that that's what's shown.
So you really cut it down to the skeleton with you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the one part that I really remember him tightening was the ending. And because the ending was probably, I don't know, let's say it was, 500 words long, and it got down to 200, and just really sharpened the focus of it. And then a couple of the other things in which a character said something that he said, this doesn't ring true in terms of who we ultimately learn the character is. So maybe you want to just, tweak this a little bit. And again, really good advice.
Yeah, one of the things that came up as sort of thematically is that writers would have there'd be a lot of build up in the beginning. So really writing and learning their character, and then you could feel sort of a rush to the end or a cluttering of all the ideas that kind of came out in the beginning of the story, because they realized, I have 4,000 words, which isn't a lot for short fiction. And it's like, oh my God, and the house, it was like I'm designing a house and I left all this furniture and I ordered it all, and guess what, it doesn't fit. And unlike my mother, who would just keep it all, and she loved to clear a room full of furniture, but you have to get rid of some of the furniture. And a lot of it was at the front, and then some of it was sharpening the endings. So there's a lot of work on those two. That, I think, sometimes bringing kind of a character up and really you want complex characterization, but you don't have a lot of time for rumination. So you do have to show character pretty quickly in brief little moments, so those really all have to work very well. So it's sort of okay, you have a paragraph where we're learning about this character, but how can we boil it down to an action or a sentence to make that sort of, or communicate that? And that was a lot of, in some cases I was sort of finding inconsistencies in the mystery plot or that kind of thing, which is fine. And that's honestly easier to do, but I think the harder feedback to give is character or ending or beginning, like how you sort of shape those.
As I said, one of the pieces that, and it's the main character in the story, John just read one line of dialogue, and he was like, no, it doesn't work for this character. You have to change it. You have to make it a little bit more nuanced than what you have. And he was 100% right. I mean, I was in a police procedural mode, and I was giving, language to somebody that wouldn't be what they would say. And he picked up on it, and it made it a much better story.
So when is the career switch coming, John?
To what editor?
Yeah.
Never. Yeah.
I don't know, Robin makes a very compelling
Editing
case.
is fun, but it's not more fun than writing.
Do both of those. I went giving up the teaching.
Oh, no, I can't do that.
All right, so as queer authors working in a genre where LGBTQ plus voices have historically been sidelined, what does this anthology mean to you? Oh, that's a very philosophical question you wrote.
Yes, I did. Thank you for throwing it right back at me. What was I thinking? Robin, what does the anthology mean to you? I'll answer it.
Okay.
What does it mean to you?
So, as the question posed, I mean, growing up there was nothing. I mean, and so to have an anthology that represents the broad spectrum of our community, I mean, for me, it's empowering. For me, it's uplifting. I mean, one of the reasons, that I wrote my novels, or one of the hopes I had in writing my novels, was to represent trans people in a positive way. And I think these stories represent the depth and breadth of our community in really powerful ways, really positive ways, uplifting ways. And I think that's really important, especially in the times that we find ourselves in.
I think, of course, I mentioned the impulse or why we wrote this collection to begin with. I think it came to mean a lot more than that. During these dark times we live in, it was a solace for me to be working on it because I think a lot of us probably have this feeling of helplessness or somewhat hopelessness maybe. What do we do? And this was something you could do. So personally, for me, it was something that I could go and do, and I felt very proud of the collection, very proud to be part of this community of writers. There's so many good stories, and what I really love about it is it's not like there's so much variety, and there's a representation of trans, non-binary, gay, lesbian, bi, in all these stories. But there's also representation of different genres, which I mentioned. There's also different tones. There's different subject matter. And yet somehow it all works together as one sort of piece. Like it all has thematic threads that run through it, which we mentioned earlier. So that idea of that we could be very different and have different tastes and points of view that all sort of mesh, that's exciting, and I derived a lot of hope from it. So, we went in to sort of like say, hey, short crime, short fiction people, you need to represent us more, and we hope that happens. And we hope that we can see more queer voices represented in mainstream anthologies. This isn't, we don't want to be just have our little anthology over here. We want to be, included. But it became this other sort of feeling of like, a unifying feeling. So, and I think that's what we need right now, especially our community. We need that unifying feeling.
That's really sweet. All right. I'm gonna go down to my own questions
Yes,
first.
please.
All right, so you had a chance to read other stories. You obviously read all the other stories, not including anyone who's up here. Favorite story in the piece, or at least one you highly recommend because you're not showing preference because we all know everyone in this anthology.
Yeah.
Me as the editor? Well, I'll just say the first story in the collection, Krista Foss's story. I chose it because it's like a gut punch in the best sort of way. And we sort of just were talking about whether we wanted to start the collection with stories that, kind of eased people in. I said, no, I don't think this is a time for easing people in. I think this is a, sit up and take notice kind of time. And Krista's story, in a very beautiful way, does that. And so I don't have a favorite, but I'll sort of say that I chose that for that reason. And I think that it sets the tone, because I think there's a lot of dark territory explored in these stories. When Salem and I reached them, we're like, wow, there's some dark stuff here, but it seems like the appropriate response to what's going on. And so I do think, not that there aren't moments of levity, and we sort of try to end a more moment of sort of positivity with this sort of selection of stories, but I think that sort of setting that tone with that story was important.
Yeah, it's kind of like asking who's your favorite child.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
I know.
thank you, Len.
And I did it all on camera.
I'm gonna agree with John in the sense that Krista's stories, picked up the anthology. As I said, nobody had communicated. I didn't know what anybody else's story was. It's the first story in the book. It blew me away. And as John said, we were talking about this over dinner. I said, did you put that story first for a reason? And as he just explained, yes. And it does all of those things that John said. I mean, look, there are some truly amazing stories in the anthology that I recommend everybody read. But, from a reader's perspective, you want to be grabbed right in the beginning, and you want to be dragged into the rest of the book, and Krista's Stories does that. It just is, I remember getting to the end of that story and saying, I did not see that coming. Wow. So, yeah, and again, all my kids are my favorite, but to start the anthology and just draw people into it and just have them say, oh, I need more. That story did it for me.
One thing I'll have to say is, as reviews and coverage has been coming in with the anthology, everyone has different faves. Mm-hmm. And I really love that, because that's sort of saying, we're really speaking to taste here, not quality. They're all quality. People just have slightly different tastes, and they're picking up on different stories because it's what they enjoy reading, whatever, they're connected with it. And so I think that felt like success from an editor's standpoint.
I'm very tempted to play a game with you now where I ask everyone in the audience last book they read, and you have to recommend a story from the anthology based on that.
I haven't read them all yet.
No, just John, don't worry. But I'll spare you for now.
To know the book though.
Yeah, that's true. Let's see how much time we have. We are open to questions at any point from this point forward, so just raise your hand, but I have more questions here too if no one has any. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. So I know you didn't want doubles of icons.
Right.
So here's my question, and you can take a moment with it. If your icon was already taken by the time you got to it, did you have a backup? Who was it? Oh, you're nodding, Robin, you got some.
I did. My backup was Candy Dorling. So again, I don't know, people know Candy, one of the Walhall people, famous from Lou Reed's song, Walk on the Wild Side. So Candy was my backup. Again, a transgender icon. Go figure why I kept defaulting to transgender icons. I don't know why. But
Was it gonna be like a similar story, or did you have a whole other story in mind?
So
Where?
I picked the icon having no idea what the story was going to be. And then I built, as I said earlier, Christine Jorgensen isn't really part of the story in the sense that the story is not built around her. It's built around the fact that she was a trans icon, and it's central to one of the characters' thinking throughout the story. But I probably could have done the same thing with Candy Darling, and instead of using the New York Daily News, front page headline, I could have used Walk on the Wild Side, or something like that. So I probably would have come up with a similar story, but I don't know, because when I said Christine Jorgensen, and they said, yeah, okay, I didn't have to go to my default, but I did have a default.
That's awesome. Now I want that story.
Hey, well, maybe we'll be able to do another one of these. So the funny thing is my second choice was taken, but not my first choice, which was my first choice, obviously, was Truman Capote. My second one was James Baldwin, which Cheryl had, which I'm so glad that worked out that way, because I think, that's as it should be. And honestly, thinking about it would have to, she actually includes Baldwin as a character.
Right.
Interestingly, not too many of the stories actually include the icons as a character.
That's true.
Cheryl's does and Krista's has James Whale in it, but as a side character, not a main character. Most of them don't involve the actual character. They just have a reference, or they've worked in sort of thematic allusions, that kind of thing. So I know it's hard to sort of take on an icon, right? It's hard to feel like you have the right to write that icon. So I understand why that might be the case. At least I felt that way. But yeah,
So you had a backup too, but it was taken.
it was taken. The backup was taken.
So many stories in Crime Inc. do something subversive, whether through narrative structure, moral ambiguity, or character identity. What does subversion mean to you as a crime writer? Again, with the philosophical questions.
Sorry, it's the professor.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you can tell you're a professor. Write a 300-word essay.
Essay on
We're gonna hand out blue books.
Right, yeah, so that's the next portion of the evening. Little did you know. Did you have thoughts about this?
I forgot the question.
It was do you think that, we're doing something essentially subversive in writing these stories? I mean, is there something just about, writing queer crime fiction that is, subversive in its...
See, that's not what's written here, but I like that one better, so
Yeah.
answer that.
Okay. So I think the answer is yes, there is. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that there isn't a whole lot of representation of LGBTQ folks in crime fiction, unless they're the villain or the victim or some other trope. So yes, I think, just writing positive LGBTQ characters is subversive. And it's funny that I would be saying it, it's always been subversive, but it feels even more subversive now.
Yeah.
I mean, which is strange. When I started my first novel, it was 2015, I didn't think anybody was gonna wanna read a novel about a trans character, because we were in a good place, things were going okay. Barack Obama mentioned LGBTQ in the State of the Union address, things were good. And yet, here we are. And so I think it's even more important and more subversive now than it would have been 10 years ago. But it's always been subversive, because it's just, the mainstream reading public doesn't necessarily want to see LGBTQ main characters. So it's always a struggle to get them to a broader audience, to humanize them, to make them relatable and understandable, and yet at the same time be subversive.
I mean, I will say, I think, just in response to that, I think it's more the system of publishing than the readers themselves.
Okay.
I do think readers are hungry for these stories. It's just a matter of helping them find them. And editors are not, and publishers are not necessarily doing that job. And that has to do with the business of publishing and P&Ls and all that. But yeah, no, I think people are hungrier for them than we might suspect.
Yeah, it's almost like, I think, readers' tastes are much more progressive in general than publishers believe they are, essentially. Or they may have some inkling that they are, but it's a risk to take. And how you find those, how you connect readers with those stories.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, I think that, in fact, that would be the most subversive thing, is to actually to publish, queer voices that mainstream presses, to do that is, it's pretty subversive too. I often think about, this goes back to some of the comments that we've received from reviewers, and one that keeps on coming up is so many of these stories are about identity. Of course. But you gotta remember that not every reader or viewer reads crime fiction that is, exploring questions of identity. I was like, from my standpoint, from all of our standpoint, this is part of what we would talk about normally in our fiction, but that's not necessarily what's coming through. And I should say, that's not necessarily what's expected from the reader. So the reader is like crime fiction that has a lot about identity, and I was like, oh, they're sort of surprised by that. That seems kind of subversive to me, Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about this, and tell us a crime story around it, but it's there.
Do you think that has to do with the sort of, I call it the happens to be problem, this idea where a lot of people think that a queer story is safer if it's a scenario where like, oh yeah, he just happens to be like, he's this hardcore like detective, he just happens to be gay, as long as we don't like discuss what it is to be gay.
Right.
So do you think that is part of that?
Yeah, and I see both sides of that argument. I think that in some respects, people don't want to be necessarily, only their identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you should be able just to be a cop or whatever, and not, it's all about your identity. But I also think that to avoid it because you don't want to talk about it versus avoid it because you would rather talk about this other thing is different. I'm not sure sometimes I think that may be happening in some of the crime fiction. I'm not sure I could really make that statement because I don't know. But I think as a writer, your impulse should be if you want to tell a story about identity, tell a story about identity. If you want to tell a story, just a cop procedural, and you just want some representation in there because this is part of the story of there are gay cops out there, there are gay lawyers, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Then do that, but don't avoid it because you want to sort of mainstream whatever it means to be queer.
I feel like I've read books where they do avoid it and there is something a little soulless.
Yeah,
Is that hard?
It's something that becomes unspoken, and as a queer person, when it's not being spoken.
Yeah.
And I don't know if mainstream readers would, but.
So again, not from the anthology, but from the Aaron McCabe books. Yes, Aaron McCabe is a transgender criminal defense attorney. I didn't want the story to be focused on the fact that she's transgender. But I wanted the undertone of the story to deal with the issues that the transgender community face. So I was trying to go for that have it both ways type of thing, if you know what I mean, in that she happens to be transgender. But I want to explore that. But I don't want to explore it as part of the main arc of the story. I want to just explore it as part of who she is in the narrative so that people who aren't trans will read Aaron and say, oh, okay, I understand this a little bit better now. So again, maybe I was trying to split the baby and have it both ways where she just happens to be, but it's important to who she is.
But having read a while ago, if I recall correctly, she does sort of think about her own transgender identity.
Absolutely.
So I would say that's the thing that I feel like when people are talking about, it's all about identity, I think that's what people tend to be harping on. How dare you acknowledge your existence is different. That's how I tend to read it. And what they want is someone who is exactly the same as a straight person, except that they are gay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would not say you were splitting the baby. I would say you were doing exactly what I think is the right thing to do. But
It's an interesting, what you're describing is sort of an interesting flip side of the closet. It's like, there's a lot of, I think, very queer stories without any overtly queer characters in them because the writer was queer and that, it's all sort of, And so that almost the texture and everything about it feels queer, although there's not. And then there's the flip side is where it's kind of not a queer story, but has a queer character in it, you know? I know the thing that I keep on coming back to is I don't think we escape ourselves. Like we are different in some way, and that's part of our lives. It doesn't always have to be about shame though, or the coming out story. You know, it can be other things that are impacting us when we're beyond that. And I think that those stories, that's rich territory, frankly, in general.
Yeah.
For queer fiction in general.
Absolutely. I got one more question from John here. Some stories in the collection are angry, others quietly hopeful, others fierce and celebratory. Where does your story fall on that emotional spectrum and why? And these are very professor questions.
Sorry.
It's the and why. It's the
Oh yeah,
answer.
no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the first draft of my story was really dark, really angry, because look, we're in a really tough time and sometimes you get really angry. But it ended, as I said earlier, it ends on like a quasi-optimistic note, in the sense that I didn't want it to end as dark as the first draft, because I do believe that we have to have hope, and I do believe we can't give up. And sometimes maybe we can't do the best, you know, what we really like to do, but sometimes we can just do enough. And that was kind of my point, that sometimes doing enough is the best we can do. And that's okay, that's good. And so, yeah, there was anger there was frustration, but at the end of the day, there's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really, is true for the stories, because a lot of them are dark. And so I mean, it's crime fiction, yes, but this was definitely, they weren't necessarily ending in happy places, right? And they don't have to end in happy places. I don't love happy endings, but as a reader in life, I like happy endings. But I think it just speaks to our time, you know? But that doesn't mean that there isn't hope and humor and wit all through them. So I think that sort of, those two things woven together is what makes them sort of special.
I did an event like last year, I think now, and one of the other authors, it was queer authors, said that the experience of being queer is multi-genred, and so our stories are too, you know?
Yeah, that's so true.
And that's what I thought about a lot reading these stories as well. Like even the ones for an anthology that is ostensibly one genre. I found every story that I read had multiple genres within it. And I think that's a lot of what the queer experience is like. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
Any questions from the audience? All right, then I think I'm gonna say thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Lev.
Thank you for filling in.
And thank you, BGS2D, and everyone online, and everyone go buy this wonderful anthology, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you online.